Yes, there was a moment. I mean, the way I would sum it up is that we achieved a breakthrough on the north-south arrangements, the so-called Strand 2, around midnight on that Thursday night. We were up all night, as you can imagine. And within an hour or two of that, as Mark will remember very well, there was a Strand 1 breakthrough. So those were two key parts of the jigsaw. Later in the evening or in the night, there was a breakthrough on prisoners. But I suppose round about 7 or 8 a.m. on Friday morning, on Good Friday, we all began to sense that an agreement was coming. Later on, there was a crisis in the course of the Friday, and it had to do with the unionists and a reluctance to contemplate Sinn Féin ministers before decommissioning of weapons began, and for various reasons, that was never going to command consensus. At least there was never going to be a consensus on that issue. So yeah. It was resolved by a letter from the Prime Minister, but by the afternoon, then we finally did have a green light.
And just take us through what it was like for you at that moment. I don't know if you were there when the agreement was actually signed and we heard those words from the two Prime Minister. It must have been quite an emotional moment.
It was. I was there. In fact, I mean, there are famous shots of the plenary chamber. We're all crowded in. The simplicity of it, Carol, is something that I will always remember, that George Mitchell just simply asked each leader to confirm more or less yay or nay. And basically all of them did that. I mean, there were no prevarications really. There was a technical thing about one party needing to have ratification by its leadership, but effectively each leader said yes. And that the simplicity of that was something that I had not expected. Yes, there was great emotion, sense of relief, exhaustion, as Mark has mentioned, sense of catharsis, really, that after 3 or 4 days of intense negotiation, you could argue even 3 weeks, that we had reached this moment against all expectations, because the crisis earlier on the Friday had led many of us to believe that this latest effort would collapse. So it was against all of our expectations that at about 4 o'clock that afternoon, George Mitchell rang everybody and said, "You won't believe it, but David Trimble has just come into my room and is ready to do the business." I would make a distinction, Carol, but I mean, I'm not an expert on the current security situation in Northern Ireland, but my sense is that this is dissident Republicans who are signaling or making threats of one kind or another. The key thing in the 90s was that the IRA reached a decision to stop its campaign. First in 1994, then there was a relapse into violence, as you remember, with the Canary Wharf bomb sometime later, and then finally the ceasefire of the summer of 1997. So if you like, the main campaign on the Republican side, which had dominated the Troubles, was over as of the summer of 1997. So I'm not in any sense downgrading the threats that we've had since. And of course, the Omagh bomb was in the summer of '98 was the worst single atrocity for the entire Troubles. But the primary Republican paramilitary campaign was over as of the summer of 1997.
And just finally and briefly, if you could, David, what do you make of the continuing political stalemate in Northern Ireland? Still no government, still no devolved assembly or parliament?
It is, of course, disappointing. I mean, we in Dublin would have greatly welcomed the agreement reached recently between the UK and the EU, and we obviously see that as a basis on which the DUP could enter the institutions, re-enter, or at least allow the institutions to function. So it is disappointing. On the other hand, one would like to think that they will carry out the reflection they're talking about and carry it out reasonably soon. And one would like to think that there could be a decision in due course
Okay.
to restore the institutions.